Hello, good afternoon. Welcome. Welcome to our professional learning coding series. My name is Melissa. I will be your blue coat for our session today. With me behind the scenes, I have Mary. We just had some great chats about how much we love the Ozobots, and we're getting into that activity today. If you have any questions throughout our live stream, you can pop them into the comment box, and Mary will help me moderate and answer those questions. And also, there may be opportunity for me to answer your questions live while we're streaming. If you're joining, you're watching after the live stream, these videos are recorded, so hello from the past if you're watching in the future. Thanks again for joining us. We are covering the second part of the lesson called All Sorted for grade 1-2 today. So before we go to the lesson, I would like to acknowledge that, well, I myself am on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Atikameksheng, Anishinaabeg, and Wanapitei First Nation. I would like to also acknowledge the Métis Nation for their cultural and economic contributions in this area. These lands sit in the Robinson-Huron Treaty area. And as we are all treaty people, it is important for us all to be thinking about what treaty area we live in and are an active part. So let's take a moment to appreciate the land that we are on by acknowledging the traditional territory and treaty area that you might be located in. Now, another thing I sort of refer to as housekeeping item, we have, just to highlight some of the things that we're offering this year through for virtual learning, we're doing live stream science shows, and that's something that we had dropped off for a little while. We're going to be sticking to our regularly scheduled live science shows so long as we can. I want to also, excuse me, highlight, excuse me, just grab some water before I came in. Before we get to the lesson, wanted to just show you step by step where again to find the resources for the lesson. So we create lesson plans and handouts that go along with these videos. So I'll take a quick little detour so that we can check that out. Right here. So here we have our general Science North, sciencenorth.ca website. If you look at the top here, we have the different tabs. The Learn tab is where we have everything for schools. I can click on the Schools tab, which will load to another page where I see a Teachers tab. The Teachers, this is for you. And I can click directly on the Teachers tab. And I can also click on the Educator Resources in this menu here. This will bring us to the resources, as I mentioned, for our session today. So this little flag, Professional Learning Coding Series. So we've got, the lessons are grouped by grade and by topic. So we have here February 16th, 17th, that's our lesson, where we have all of the handouts, answer key, we have a lesson plan, practice, and different handouts as well that we're gonna look at together today. So that's where those live if you wanna access them after our session today. Perfect. So let's move on to our lesson. So as I mentioned, today is the part 2 of All Sorted, the lesson we started yesterday. I have shown this and this. Same sort of workshop goals. We are looking to get students excited, thinking about science, math, coding, all of those things. We're covering the math activity today. I will briefly speak about the activities that we went over yesterday, though that video is recorded and posted to the website as well. So the curriculum connections it's a coding professional learning series. So we're looking at the new coding expectations. So we'll be looking at writing and executing code and code that involves sequential events. So we're applying conditional statements. So we call them often if-then statements. And we've done this in a number of ways since the beginning. So this is the third lesson that we're doing with grades 1, 2. And we're really sort of looking at the concept of a conditional statement and doing it repeatedly. That's really one way that we can reinforce those coding concepts, sort of like prime the students to get to the more complicated concepts. And we're applying it to different science curriculum connections. So the lesson is called All Sorted. Sorting and classifying things is really important in science. We classify plants, animals, matter, chemicals. It's something that we do often. So we're taking that coding conditional statement concept and applying it to those different science concepts. So the first activity that we had proposed, the unplugged activity, introduced the concept of the if-then statement or the conditional statement. The conditional statement is a crucial part of the decision-making process for computers. The computer can only ever do what we tell it to do. So we need to build a series of conditional statements. If something is true, then do an action. Or in this case, else you can do another action. So I've given a few examples here, and I did cover this sort of at length yesterday. So this is sort of meant to be sort of getting up, moving around, and executing different if-then functions. With movement, it's always nice to get up and get moving. So we also looked at a set of 4 handouts that deal with sorting statements. 2 of them were for grade 1, 2 of them for grade 2. And essentially it has, students are given an if-then statement. So for example, with living things, I believe it was if the picture shows a living thing, then draw an arrow to the right. If else, draw an arrow to the left. So we looked at those yesterday. So now we're going to look at the coding activity. So typically we pair 2 offline activities with a sort of online activity. Now the tool that we're going to be using today are called Ozobots. They're a neat little coding tool they're neat because they're very simple in some aspects, but they're scalable to be more complex. So it's a neat tool. Again, I said it's a neat tool several times. I think it's really, really neat. But what I was going to add there is that it's a tool that can be scalable for all the grade levels. So it's great in that if you had one class set, it could be sort of shared amongst grades because it does have different functionality to scale in complexity up or down. So at its most basic coding level, students can draw and use color codes. So the Ozobot has little sensors, and it has a built-in line following function. So if students draw a black line, the Ozobot will follow it. And if its sensors detect a certain color code, it will perform a certain action. So the color codes, in essence, are conditional statements. So if the Ozobot sees blue, red, and green in that sequence, then it will turn right at the next intersection. So if you have a set of these Ozobots, like I said, at the base, you can use them for color codes, but there's also, and we won't get into this in depth today, but I just wanted to highlight, because this is a new tool that we've presented. So in our past lessons, we've used Scratch Junior. And I will talk a little bit about adapting this lesson for Scratch Junior if you don't have Ozobots. So I wanted to show something, a really neat thing called Ozobot. And this program here can be used to load different codes that is different than the drawing color codes. So you can program the Ozobot to do different things than its built-in line following function. So something I did want to highlight is here you can really see the sort of the scalability. You have 5 different levels, and if you have, you have level 1 is meant for pre-readers. So you have all of these different icons that obviously don't have any text. They're a little more intuitive. You have beginner, where you're getting text in the blocks, and the functions are getting more and more complex. So you can do more and more with the Ozobot sort of as your students grow with them. So I certainly wouldn't expect any student in grade 1, 2 to end up at level 5 at the master level, but it's great that this tool can be used across a number of different skill and grade levels. So Ozobot, it's really neat. So color codes are conditional statements, and we're going to look at the Ozobot itself, sort of a little bit of a crash course in how to use the Ozobot. So I'm going to switch my camera so that we can see my desk here. Perfect. So here I've got the little bot, and something that is important to do before you start is to calibrate the Ozobot. So the Ozobot is going to behave differently under different light conditions. Actually, you can see my hands are making shadows here. So you're going to want to calibrate it anytime you're using it in a different space, sort of with different lighting. So on the handouts that we provided, there's this big black dot that's meant for calibration. If you don't have a printout, you can simply draw yourself a big black dot. The dot has to be sort of colored in full and a little bit larger than the base of the Ozobot itself. So you'll see, I'll turn it on. And in order to calibrate, you want to hold down the power button for 2 seconds. The light on top flashes white. You quickly press it onto the calibration dot. If the Ozobot is calibrated properly, the light will turn green, else the light will turn red. So we'll need to recalibrate in that case. So let's hold for 2 seconds. Okay, the light flashed. He spins around. Oh, I didn't touch my finger, but that's okay because he flashed green. Okay, so that means my calibration was successful. So now the Ozobot is going to, its baseline following function. So he'll follow any line that you draw until he sees a code. I want to anthropomorphize the robot. I keep calling it he. I apologize. It will follow the line. So this code here, red, green, represents something to the Ozobot. I forget, I'll double check. Red, green is tornado. So that spin that it did was the tornado move. So that was actually another move because you can see this is again, you can see the link between patterns. This pattern here, now when the bot went this direction, we had green, red, which represents a different code. And that green, red is a spin code. So what I really like that you can freehand. You can write anything. The bot will follow the line, and anytime that you have given it a code, then it will perform what that code, let's say, says. I wanted to go over just a few tips and tricks, because especially if you're freehanding, if the lines are too thin, if they're too thick, they don't always work. So let's swap out of the document camera here. Share a new screen. So one of the things that can be challenging, depending on sort of the age and manual dexterity of the people who are using your Ozobots, can be to keep a line sort of the same thickness. So the markers that come with the Ozobot have like a really great chisel tip, I guess. Is the chisel tip is essentially the right size if you press it on its side, but the line does need to be consistent. So if we have it's too thin or it's too thick, you want to make sure that you're being consistent. You can see here you want to have the lines sort of spread far apart, and being conscious of corners that are too sharp. It may, if the sensor sees another line, then it might get confused as to where it's supposed to go. In the handouts that we have built for this lesson, the lines are pre-made and the students simply have to fill in the color code. One of the other things that we find, again, depending on again, like manual dexterity or coloring skills of the students, it can be hard for them to get the right size of code. So again, in these handouts, there's a little spot that you can color in. So all of these resources, if you have a set of Ozobots that you've purchased for your school, for your classroom, these resources are all included in that kit. So markers, you can use any. You need a combination of black, green, blue, and red. So those are the 4 colors that you need. The black ones run out obviously the quickest. You want to get washable markers. I accidentally bought permanent markers one time to do an Ozobot activity, and it was a bold move. Parents are just not expecting that you're going to hand their child a permanent marker. So it didn't last very long. So certainly the washable marker, I was like, but the permanent markers are going to last so much longer. But yeah, it's what happens when you forget that kids be kids. So any markers, they can be replaced by any old sort of Crayola marker, but you need those 4 colors. So you want to make sure that the codes are on a straight edge. They're not too close to corners. There are actually Ozobot stickers that exist that you would just stick on a code. I've also seen people using little colored dot stickers. Those also work as well. So lots of different ways to use these. So the freehand is really neat, that students can draw whatever they like and the Ozobot will follow the code. But you can use it to provide activities with a little bit more structure. So you can go with the art aspect and also with the coding aspect. So let's look at the rest of the handouts that we have for this lesson. I'll switch back to my document camera here. So I've got one of the handouts is just a practice handout. So essentially it has lines and spots for empty code. So these I filled in. Now, one thing that this part of the activity is meant to do is sort of to be exploration. What does how does the bot behave when I perform certain things. So there's a one page and then a second page. There are some different for codes that you can try. And then where we have intersections. So the code here of blue, red, green tells the Ozobot to go right at the next intersection. So the Ozobot's going to keep going along this line until it hits the intersection, and then it's going to turn right. Now, something that's kind of interesting, if you haven't given the Ozobot an instruction, it won't know which way to go. It'll sort of pick at random. So let's sort of try that. Now, since my Ozobot shut off already, I'm going to recalibrate it. So I'm just going to do that hold for 2 seconds. Feels like longer than 2 seconds. And I have the green light, so that's great. Okay, so it did as I expected. At the first intersection that it crossed here, it turned right, and then it sort of went straight. So another thing to highlight, maybe you've already noticed, as the Ozobot passes over a color code, the LED on top flashes that color. So you can see blue, red, green, turn right. Now, we haven't given a second code for what to do at this intersection. So you'll notice the first time it went right and then it went straight through. The next time it went right and then it turned left again. And that's because it only received one code. It only received a code for the first intersection. So something that is interesting to try is to set the Ozobot coming from the other side. So here it hasn't been given a code. It won't have an instruction. So how again is it going to behave once it gets there? Okay, it went straight. Green, red, blue. So it may not do that every time. Like I said, it will randomly decide which direction, whether it goes straight or right or left. I think it might have gone right because it went over this code and then I brought it here. But let's see what this one does. I don't remember. So blue, black, red represents a code. And I can backwards figure out what it is. Blue, black, red is go straight. So some fun, different exploration that students can do would be, does the code, is it the same forwards and backwards, right? Is the code a palindrome? Some of them are, some of them, so if you pass right or left over the code, it doesn't really matter, it does the same thing. Or you have some of those fun codes that reverse, so red, green, and green, red, green, red. So another thing that students can practice if they want, if you want to just go straight over a section and you don't want to color or you don't want to give it a code, you can color the line over in black. So I would encourage just to try out different things and to try out different things many times to sort of compare. Like you saw at first, you know, it took a certain path, and the next time it took a certain path, though it did always follow this code instruction, followed that first code, and then it had to sort of make a decision for itself. So that sort of leads us to the math, the activity, the maze activity, let's say. So we have these three codes of go left, go right, go straight. So we saw go right and go straight. Go left is a green, black, red code. And sort of the story, the narrative that we've pitched here is the Ozobot wants to grow. And the Ozobot knows that things need energy to grow. So he wants to try to collect energy. So we'll fill in the color codes. Here's the maze here. So we'll fill in the color codes so that the Ozobot can leave the house and come back while collecting energy that he can use, that it can use. So this activity, it's not terribly structured. We didn't provide an answer key for this handout because there's a lot of different ways that you can sort of solve this maze. And essentially, we want to have the bot go from and to the house, however path that takes. So the discussion points are meant to be around different kinds of energy and sort of needs of living things. So even if the Ozobot wants to grow, even if he collects enough energy to grow, it's not a living thing. So it can plug in all it wants, but it still won't be able to grow. We can talk also about the sun. So this Ozobot doesn't have a solar panel on it. So, I mean, some things can get energy from the sun. Plants can get energy from the sun, but not every sort of electronic thing can. And he certainly can't get any energy from say eating grass, let's say. So in this activity, I would encourage students to sort of draw, before filling in the codes, trying to draw out the maze. Which path do you want the bot to go? So this sort of hits your coding curriculum because they're planning sequential events. So they're planning a path around the maze. So depending on which path that they decide they want to take, then they'll have to make choices about the code that we want to give. So let's say, for example, we want to start upwards. So if we go here over to this code is going to tell the bot what to do at this intersection. So if we want it to go right, then we will have to tell it here. If we want it to go straight here, then again, we'll have to tell it here. So again, we can imagine we want it to go right, and then it's going to come over here, and there's a code here. So it's going to keep this code until it reaches the next intersection. So what we tell it to do here, it's going to perform over here. And then again, if we and sort of follow the maze throughout. Now, if you start off from the bottom, it's a little less predictable, and actually a fun thing might be to have the bot try to make the bot go both ways. Will it do the same thing whether you put it at sort of the start? We didn't give a start or end. It's meant to be a little bit more exploratory and open-ended. If you come to this intersection here, the bot will have a choice to make whether to go right or straight, though you haven't had the opportunity to give it a code. So it's going to sort of it will do something there. And another interesting thing to try out could be to have the bot try the maze without filling in the codes. Now, I know it will probably get a little confused over the white spots here. And again, something to remind the students, if they don't want to have a code, then they can just color it in black. So at any given spot, you can do that. So let's, just for the sake of seeing, let's see what it does. Okay, so he decided to turn there. And I think once it gets a number of sort of white codes, he doesn't really know what to do. So in order to have it complete the maze, I would sort of fill in the codes where I want them and fill in black so that there are no more white spots. And another thing that could be done, you can certainly give students more than one copy and encourage them to try different paths. So I think that's sort of our crash course in Ozobots. I'll stop this screen here. See if I forgot anything. Okay, so here I've just got a slide with some of the basic codes. And again, if you do have a set of these Ozobots, they come with the printed sort of, like glossy cards with the list of codes. So here are some examples of different codes that change the speed that, again, you might want to incorporate into that sort of fun maze. So you have snail dose and nitro boost, sort of speed up and slow down for a short amount of time. Whereas slow, cruise, fast, and turbo, so the slow, cruise, fast, and turbo, they will set the speed until they reach another speed code. So it'll continue to go slowly until, say, it hits a turbo. And these are some, direction codes. So go left, go straight, go right. Now there are a whole host of other different codes, but for sort of your grade 1-2 students, this should be sort of all you need. Now I did mention that I would talk a little bit about Scratch Junior and how we might sort of adapt this activity to Scratch Junior. So I'll quickly share a little code, a little program that could be used sort of in substitute. So it goes along quite well with the handouts that we discussed yesterday, the sorting, those sorting handouts. Let me find Scratch Junior. So as a sort of a different option for coding tool for this lesson. So out here, in here. So in those sorting handouts from yesterday, we had a number of different icons. This would be an example of a code that you could write for living and non-living things. You would have an if statement. If the image shows a living thing, then move to the right. Else move to the left. So in this case, when I click the flag here, I click my program, we'll see the sprites sorting themselves based on those characteristics that we set out at the outset. So if I look inside the code here, I have the list of the sprites. Oops, this is in French. The names of the sprites don't really matter. What is most important, though, is that the code here, so for each sprite, so for the house, we're going to the left by 4 spots. So this was the initial positions, and we had the house move to the left, the soccer ball to the left, and so on and so forth. The tree moves to the right. So these are just very short, very simple codes, but also illustrate that the sorting concept. So some things go right, some things go left. Now, again, we did talk about movement in one of the other grade 2 lessons, and we use Scratch Junior. So if you're looking again for a little bit more on how to do that, I would refer you to those lessons. Now there was like one other thing that I think I wanted to mention about the Ozobots. Oh yeah, we had this really great idea that it would be fun to have the students sort of, we came up with this idea. It was like, oh, it's such a great idea, but we had already written the lesson and it was already translated and it was already on the website. But it would be really cool to have students be Ozobots themselves. So I imagine you could tape out the classroom, again, in like this perfect post-COVID land. You got black lines, and the students themselves get to be the Ozobots, and they could even make up their own codes. So you could use different colors. They don't have to be color codes. They could be shape codes. And when there's an intersection, then students would sort of perform that if-then. So if they like sort of the Ozobot activity and want to sort of pretend and be robots. We thought that would be a neat way to sort of extend from the coding world to the physical world, where they are still executing code. So I think that's all that I have for today. I've got Mary saying ask questions in the chat so I can hang out for a few minutes. If anyone has any questions, we would love to do our best to answer them. I will, before I sign off, share my screen just one last time to thank you. We have an email dedicated to this project and answering questions. So if you have anything that comes up in the future, please don't hesitate to send us an email, educators@sciencenorth.ca. I have up also a QR code here. So we are always looking for feedback. We want to make these lessons sort of the most that they can be and the most useful for you, the teachers. So if you have time, we would greatly appreciate the feedback on this session. And otherwise, I would like to thank you again for joining us. Take care and happy Wednesday.